going to talk about a number of topics: practical phenomenology, projection awareness. But perhaps first, it's good to get some context because you have a lot of insights, opinions, experiences. So it'd be good firstly to understand a little bit about where that comes from, where you're coming from, what's your personal, your experiential and your philosophical background that you bring to examining these topics.
Yeah, so where I start out as a kind of a science teenage geek. And I'm very interested in the human brain and in physiology in general. And my interest in psychology only comes later. So by the time I'm 15, I have a research grant, three research grants, 2 equipment grants and 1 monetary grant to, become a young scientist, and particularly to develop a project on brain research that I had kind of conceived together with a friend.
What year was that?
That was 1958 or 59, maybe 59. Yeah, I think it was 59. No, it was 59-60. That's where it was. I graduated in 61. So that's where it started, somewhere in my junior year. So then I went off to college or university, which didn't agree with me whatsoever. And I landed up working in the computer industry, the starting computer industry, writing software on a project which was to do neurological diagnosis by computer at New York University under a very brilliant guy named Max Woodbury and his underling, who was maybe even more brilliant, named Andrew Singer. And I then decided, after a couple of years of doing that I wanted to study psychophysiology. So I went back to university and studied psychophysiology, which is basically brain and behavior. But I was really interested in brain and consciousness. And I was part of the scene in San Francisco in the 60s. I lived in the Haight, Ashbury. And so we were taking various psychoactive substances. And so the topic of consciousness was really big because we realized what an incredible change in awareness and knowing would take place when you would take these substances. And so my immediate thing was, what's going on in the brain? And I spent a number of years trying to look at that. But in the end, I decided what's really interesting is what we're doing with consciousness. Yeah, the brain has, you could call it the major the primary seat of consciousness, although I think consciousness is in your entire body as well. So I started thinking about how is it I had some of these experiences on psychedelics that I had. And I realized I could have some of them without psychedelics, and that it's really the way I deploy my attention. When I say deploy attention, that means how you focus attention, what you pay attention to, and that sounds very simple and trivial, but really it's not, because there are many layers of what one can pay attention to. And after doing a whole lot more self-experimentation, I decided that the thing to look at is the how of consciousness, not what it is, because most of the consciousness research, all the debates going on is what is consciousness? And I think that will never tell us anything. That's a metaphysical question. What is it? What is it made of, kind of thing? As like the answer to what is matter made of, was subatomic particles. But what are subatomic particles? And you keep going down that rabbit hole, and it doesn't actually alter how you experience the world and what you know. And I was much more interested in how consciousness and the alteration of consciousness leads to other kinds of knowing. That knowledge isn't an absolute thing, is one of the conclusions I reached early on. That knowledge is determined not only by context, not only by social context, not only by psychological context, but it's determined by the context of how you deploy your attention. What's created in your awareness, what's created in your knowing and the knowledge you have depends on the state of consciousness you're in. And actually, Charles Tart wrote an interesting paper about that many years ago, and he actually got it into Science, the prestige journal for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So, and that seemed to be a very key thing. And then as time went on, in the 90s, I went to a conference at the University of Arizona at their medical school in Tucson. And it was the first meeting of what's now the big association for consciousness studies. And there was a young graduate student who I think just finished his PhD there, who got up and gave a talk, David Chalmers, in which he talked about the hard problem. And everyone got very excited, but I didn't, because the problem they're trying to solve is, what is consciousness? Where does it come from? And I didn't see that as really a very interesting problem. And to call it the hard problem and then to build a whole career on the fact he called it the hard problem, I found almost laughable, because everyone knew it was the hard problem. It had been, and anyone who'd read anything about philosophy of mind, who had read any kind of, or done any neurophysiology, which I certainly had at that point, knew that was a hard problem. So I decided that wasn't the direction I wanted to go. So I started looking at the phenomenological basis of our knowing, and how do we understand that, and what can we do to actually change, manipulate, facilitate that. In other words, I was not interested in the what of consciousness. I was interested in the how, and how you deploy attention, how you use your attention in a way that you become aware of things you're usually not aware of. And you can start with a simple thing. You can imagine you walk into a room, and it's a room you've been in a dozen times. And you have an idea of what the room is and what's going on in it. But if I get you, or you do it yourself, pay attention to the parts of the room you never pay attention to. Give them your full attention. There's a subtle way in which it's not quite the same room anymore. It's not a big deal, but it's just a very simple example. And I noticed also all the time how people, evaluate things, how they look at the world. For instance, we have in standard psychology, we talk about the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is when you, for instance, look at how someone's dressed and you make assumptions about him or her. I can give you an example. There was a guy near where I grew up he was older, he must have been in his 60s when I saw him. And he wore basically sort of tweedy, old, sort of somewhat worn out suits, and drove an old station wagon. So the typical attribution error is that he's kind of old, poor, and doesn't have much. Well, he's one of the richest men in Long Island. He owned what was known as the Whitney Estates then. But he obviously liked his old car and didn't want to give it up. And he liked his old shitty suits, so he didn't want to give those up. So the fundamental attribution error comes about because we're two types of processors for processing input or new information or sensory input. We are top-down processors. We have our ideas of how the world looks and how it is, and we sort of form the input according to those beliefs and rules. And then we're bottom-up processors, and that is, when something really surprises us, we don't have a rule for it, or we don't have an already existing form for it, and we don't know what to make out of it. but we quickly tried to top-down process it into something that we know. And I'll give you an example I had in India. I went to India in the mid-'70s. I was hitchhiked part of the way and then flew part of the way. And along the way, I drank some bad water and I wasn't feeling terribly well, so I was a bit out of it. And when you're a bit out of it, your perception changes, right? You just, maybe you recognize things more slowly. Things don't compute immediately. You're kind of going at a slower pace. So I'm standing in Connaught Place in Delhi, and I'm kind of looking around. It's very crowded. You know, all these saris going by, and all these Indian guys, and chai wallas, and all that kind of stuff is around me. And I'm just taking it in, going, God, this is colorful. Maybe a bit too crowded for my taste, but it was interesting. And I was, out of the corner of my eye, I was aware of something coming up to me, sort of moving in my direction, but sort of near the ground. And as I caught sight of it, first I thought it was some kind of animal. Then I thought it was some kind of strange ape like I'd never seen before. It was very bizarre looking because I was looking right at it at this point. And then after a few more changes, it turned into a beggar child with no legs on some kind of wheelie board. But I watched myself because, you know, I'm in slow motion because I'm not feeling well. I watched myself change it. It went through steps, you know, a vague animal, maybe a dog, no, some kind of ape, some kind of really bizarre ape, and then on and on and on until I finally top-down processed it into this child. And I realized that one of the things that I used to experience with psychedelics is that process slowing down where I could step through it. And then it occurred to me, what else could we know if we slow that process down? Or particularly if we don't pay attention to it immediately, even if we are getting the top-down picture, child, if we allow a kind of opening to notice something else. Now, one of the things I learned through doing this is how much people around me are projecting their own realities out into the world. They're just, they see something and they tell you immediately what it is. And I'm going, well, how'd you know that? Because, you know, I saw what you saw, but I don't know that. How did you know that? Oh, it obviously is. And so another thing I learned to do is say to myself, it's not obvious what it is. And I'm a true skeptic. I'm not a skeptic in the sense of like the skeptic society that wants to debunk things. They're true believers, actually. They believe in a certain reality and they're trying to maintain it. They're the ultimate top-down processors. My skepticism is really aligned with the Roman skeptic Sextus Empiricus. And he wasn't like Pyrrho from ancient Greece, who had a very extreme skepticism. But the skepticism of Sextus Empiricus was like, there's always a new possibility. The thing is open, it's open-ended. You don't finally know something absolutely, you just don't. You can kind of act as if, okay, I'm gonna go on that for a while because it's convenient, but you always have to tell yourself, it's a temporary assignment of meaning, of value, of knowledge. And I came to call this ontological neutralism, because we're always trying to fix what the bottom line is, what's real. And that's ontological, what exists. You know, what's really out there. We're always trying to fix that. And I found that if you didn't try to fix that, and you just do, you're temporarily operating as if. And that as if may go on for years, but there's always an opening for something to disrupt it. You leave that. And this makes a problem for a lot of people because it's like being in a state of constant ambivalence. And people don't like that. They like things black, white, yes, no, up, down, that's where they want it. But I found that really the psychedelic experience was really about knocking the ontological surety out from under you so that you were in a state of, relativism in terms of what exists. And if you remain neutral, things would unfold in very interesting ways. And here's what happened in the, I took Audsley LSD. This guy Audsley was a chemist making LSD before it was illegal in San Francisco. And that's what a lot of people in San Francisco were taking in the mid-60s. And I remember having an experience of walking out I was on LSD and I was with some friends, and we came out of that huge greenhouse in San Francisco, in the Golden Gate Park. What's it called? Not the Arboretum?
Exploratorium.
Well, no, not the Exploratorium. This is just a huge greenhouse.
Yeah.
We walked through the greenhouse, and then we came out, and the experience I had, it was like losing consciousness, but still functioning. And then I came back into the current present, and I saw it very differently. We were standing by a kind of a log that had been put down as a border for some bit of the ground. And I looked at it, and I said to one of the friends that was with me, you dig right in that spot by the log, and you'll find a key on a chain with an F stamped on it. And for some reason, he just jumped down and did it and pulled up this chain with a key on it with an F stamped on it. And it was, the only reason I knew that is because the way my attention was so open, it was just knowing things that weren't usually available to me when I was mainly in top-down mode and just operated in top-down mode. And I had many other experiences like that when you release the hold it has on you. But we feel more comfortable knowing what we think we know about what's real than leaving it as an open issue or an open question. And that's the problem. It's kind of scary for people to let go of that. And it is also scary because many people have had the experience on psychedelics and of talking to someone they've known for a long time and they seem entirely different, and it makes them very paranoid. This person isn't who I thought I knew she was or he is. They're someone else. And once you learn to deploy your attention differently, you do that all the time with everybody. That's just becomes an ongoing process. And you certainly don't need psychedelics. I haven't had psychedelics since 1967, 68. No, 69 I had some mescaline, yeah, 69. And it's now what, 2023.